In the previous episode of this series, we explored the origins of ancient Egypt. We looked at the earliest communities along the Nile and the emergence of powerful chieftains. Over time, these communities evolved into competing regional states, eventually culminating in the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt and the rise of the First and Second Dynasties. In this video, we turn to the next great chapter of Egyptian history, the Old Kingdom, an era that lasted roughly from 2700 to 2200 BC and is often regarded as the first golden age of Egyptian civilization. It was a time when the foundations of Egypt's identity were firmly established and when some of the most ambitious building projects in human history were undertaken. After the death of Khafre, his son Necherchet came to power, marking the transition from the Second to the Third Dynasty. You might be wondering, if it was his son who succeeded him, why is this considered a new dynasty? Egyptian history is traditionally divided by historians and archaeologists into periods: the early dynastic period, the Old, Middle and New Kingdoms, as well as the intermediate periods that separate them. These kingdoms correspond to times when Egypt was an independent, unified state under a single ruler. The division into dynasties, on the other hand, comes primarily from Manetho, an Egyptian historian writing in the Ptolemaic period, centuries after the events he described. His system grouped kings into sequences that do not always reflect clear political breaks. Therefore, a new dynasty does not necessarily mean a disruption in royal succession. It is also important to note that while the Old Kingdom has left behind considerable archaeological evidence, much about the period remains uncertain. The exact dates and lengths of many reigns, as well as the precise order of kings, are sometimes unclear. In many cases, we rely on fragmentary inscriptions and later king lists, so while we have a general framework, many details remain sketchy. Necherchet, later known as Giza, ruled for around 20 years. We know very little about his reign, but it is clear that during his time, the kingdom was stable and economically prosperous. He extended Egypt's borders southwest into the Libyan desert and northeast into the Sinai Peninsula, sending expeditions to mine copper. What Giza is best known for, however, is his tomb. Originally, Giza's tomb was intended to be a mastaba, a rectangular mud brick structure characteristic of the earlier dynasties. But Imhotep, Giza's chancellor, high priest and chief architect, had a revolutionary idea. Instead of mud brick, he proposed building the tomb in fine limestone, a material not previously used on such a scale. Once the initial mastaba was complete, Imhotep imagined adding another, smaller mastaba on top of it, and then another smaller one above that, until the structure rose in 6 distinct layers. Thus, the first pyramid was created. While not a true pyramid in the geometric sense, it established the conceptual basis for the later development of smooth-sided pyramids. For its time, this design was extraordinary. It transformed a familiar form into something monumental, a stairway reaching toward the sky. The shape may have symbolized the primeval mound, the first hill of creation in Egyptian mythology from which life emerged, or served as a bridge to the imperishable stars, allowing the king to ascend to the realm of the divine. Beneath the pyramid, a network of tunnels and chambers stretches for nearly 6 kilometers. At its center lies the burial chamber, a vaulted structure built in 4 courses of finely dressed granite. The king's sarcophagus was placed here, but no mummy was found, as the tomb had been looted in antiquity. The ceiling was originally decorated with low-relief stars. Many of the tunnel walls are lined with blue faience tiles and also bear depictions of the king participating in the Hebset festival, which celebrated the rejuvenation of royal power. Beyond the central chamber, the other galleries held the remains of several members of the royal family, as well as the king's grave goods. Over 40,000 stone vessels were discovered, many of which had belonged to the kings of earlier dynasties. Surrounding the pyramid was a massive wall of finely dressed Tura limestone. Inside, courts, chapels and other buildings were laid out to mirror the royal palace, providing spaces for various ceremonies. To the southern edge lay the South Tomb, a mastaba with an underground chamber intended for the king's ka, an aspect of the soul in Egyptian belief which required a dwelling and offerings in the afterlife. To the north of the pyramid stood the mortuary temple, alongside the serdab, a small enclosed chamber housing a magnificent life-size statue of Giza, through which his spirit could observe and receive the ongoing rituals. Constructing Giza's pyramid complex was a colossal undertaking. Imhotep oversaw the quarrying, dressing and placement of millions of tons of fine limestone. Craftsmen worked with copper chisels, stone hammers and wooden sledges to cut and move the blocks, while the pyramid tunnels were carved directly into the hard bedrock, an extraordinary feat given the tools of the time. Approximately 120 tons of limestone had to be handled daily to complete the pyramid within Giza's 19-year reign. Imhotep's genius is evident in every aspect of the complex. He solved unprecedented architectural problems and created a monument that has endured for over 4.5 millennia. So remarkable was his achievement that he was later deified as a god of architecture and medicine and regarded as a son of Ptah, the patron of craftsmen. After Giza, the Third Dynasty saw a series of rulers whose reigns were often brief and whose monuments are far less well known. Sekhemkhet, perhaps Giza's son or younger brother, ruled for 6 to 7 years. He began building a pyramid at Saqqara, sometimes called the Buried Pyramid, but it remained unfinished due to his early death. When the underground burial chamber was discovered in the 1950s, it was still sealed. Inside was an empty stone sarcophagus. Alongside it were decayed wooden caskets and offerings, including gold bracelets, beads, and various vessels. Some scholars suggest that Sekhemkhet's pyramid may have been intended as a cenotaph, a symbolic burial site, since no body was found there, perhaps having been placed elsewhere in a tomb that has yet to be discovered. Sanecht, sometimes identified as Nebka, is another enigmatic figure of the dynasty. His identity and precise place in the line of succession remains uncertain. Some theories suggest he may have ruled briefly before Giza, although most now place him after Sekhemkhet. Archaeologists are unsure about the location of his tomb, but he may have been buried in a mastaba near the village of Beit Khalaf. Kaba, who ruled after Sekhemkhet and Sanecht, is primarily known from inscriptions on a handful of vases and walls. Later scribes attempted to erase his name, which may indicate that he was a usurper. His tomb is most probably the layer pyramid at Zayawet el-Aryan, southwest of Giza. Finally, Huni, who ruled for roughly 24 years, remains the most enigmatic of the late Third Dynasty kings. Scholars debate whether he was Kaba's son or simply the same individual under a different name. Very little evidence of his reign survives, but the length of his rule suggests a period of relative stability following the rapid succession of his predecessors. With Huni's death, the Third Dynasty came to an end. Beyond monumental architecture, this period also saw the rise of skilled officials chosen by the king due to their merit rather than by noble birth. These men were highly honored, and some received elaborate mastaba burials, such as Hesire, a close confidant of the king who served both as a dentist and a scribe. Sneferu, the first king of the Fourth Dynasty, was the son-in-law of Huni through his marriage to Huni's daughter, Hetharis I. He may also have been Huni's son by a secondary wife. Sneferu was the first king to inscribe his name within a cartouche, an elongated oval with a horizontal line at one end, symbolizing royal authority and protection over everything the sun encircled. Sneferu had a long and prosperous reign that marked the beginning of a particularly powerful phase of the Old Kingdom. He was highly regarded by later Egyptians, who honored him with the epithet the Beneficent King and maintained a cult in his name for thousands of years. During his rule, expeditions were sent into the Sinai Peninsula to mine copper and turquoise. military campaigns were undertaken, both to the south against the Nubians and to the west against nomadic groups in the Libyan desert. These campaigns brought captives and cattle along with security to Egypt's borders. Sneferu is most famously remembered for his passion for pyramid building. He holds the record as the king who commissioned the most pyramids for himself in Egyptian history. Under his reign, the stepped pyramid of the Third Dynasty gradually gave way to the smooth-sided or true pyramid. This transformation was not immediate but the result of large-scale experimentation. Architects under Sneferu tested innovative designs and construction techniques, and through trial and error ultimately perfected the form that would define the pyramids of the Old Kingdom. The earliest of these projects was the Meidum Pyramid. Located south of Memphis on the edge of the Fayum region, it appears to have begun as a traditional stepped pyramid that was later modified to create smooth outer faces. However, serious structural problems arose. The outer casing stones were poorly bonded to the inner core, and parts of the outer layers were built on unstable ground. At some point, large portions of the pyramid collapsed, and so the project was abandoned. Sneferu then turned his attention to a new site at Dashur, where he began another pyramid. But the monument was built on unstable ground, and as the construction progressed, to reduce the risk of collapse, the upper portion of the pyramid was built at a much shallower angle. This change produced the distinctive appearance that gives the pyramid its modern name, the Bent Pyramid. Although the building did not collapse thanks to the structural changes and the addition of large wooden beams to hold the walls, it was eventually abandoned as Sneferu moved on to build his third and final pyramid. Unlike the earlier experiments, the final pyramid rises at a consistent moderate angle, giving the structure greater stability and allowing it to be completed without structural problems. The monument is known today as the Red Pyramid due to the reddish hue of the exposed limestone blocks. However, in antiquity it would have looked very different as it was originally covered in polished white Tura limestone casing stones. These stones were later removed during the medieval period to build the city of Cairo, exposing the color that is visible today. Inside the Red Pyramid, a long descending passage leads to two large chambers at ground level, both covered by high cobalt ceilings. A third chamber, built higher within the pyramid and accessed by a short passage, likely served as Sneferu's burial chamber, although it was found empty due to tomb robbers. This monument represents the first fully successful smooth-sided pyramid ever constructed. After Sneferu's death, his son Khufu succeeded him and ruled for about 24 years. While later sources often portray him as a harsh ruler or tyrant, contemporary records do not suggest such a thing. Judging by the fact that a cult dedicated to him lasted for over 1,000 years after his death, he was likely well regarded by the people. Khufu is best known for commissioning his tomb, the greatest pyramid in history. He moved the royal necropolis from Dashur to Giza, which would become the principal burial ground of the Fourth Dynasty. The Great Pyramid of Giza represents the pinnacle of Egyptian architectural achievement. Its construction was an extraordinary feat of planning, mathematics and organization completed in about 20 years. Approximately 6 million tons of stone cut from the Mokattam Hills were transported, shaped and positioned course by course. The exterior, once encased in gleaming white Tura limestone, would have reflected the sun. However, like the Red Pyramid and later pyramids, this casing was stripped away during the medieval period to build the city of Cairo. At its summit, the pyramid was likely crowned with a capstone, possibly sheathed in electrum, an alloy of gold and silver. The Great Pyramid's height originally stood at 146.6 meters, making it the tallest structure in the world until the building of the Eiffel Tower at the end of the 19th century. The pyramid's interior consists of passageways leading first to the Queen's chamber, which was found empty, and then via the Grand Gallery to the King's chamber. This chamber is entirely faced with granite and topped by 5 relieving chambers made of massive slabs, totaling around 400 tons, designed to withstand the immense weight above. It contains only a roughly finished granite sarcophagus, which was placed before the roof was completed. No trace of Khufu's body has been found, likely because the tomb was looted in antiquity. The chief architect of the Great Pyramid was most likely Khemiunu, Khufu's cousin, who was buried nearby. The Great Pyramid was surrounded by a complex that included a mortuary temple, where priests performed daily rituals and offerings to honor the king. This temple was connected by a causeway to the Valley Temple, which served as the first reception and purification site, though little of either structure survives today. Valley temples take their name from the location on the banks of the Nile or beside an oasis lake. Although there's no water at these sites today, in antiquity a branch of the Nile flowed through this area. 3 smaller pyramids for Khufu's queens were built on the east side, while the west side was lined with tombs for high officials. A short distance from the Great Pyramid, archaeologists uncovered a buried wooden boat preserved in remarkable condition. This vessel, known as Khufu's solar boat, was constructed from fitted planks bound together rather than nailed, an example of sophisticated craftsmanship. Its purpose is still unknown. It may have served in royal ceremonies during the king's lifetime, or it may have been purely symbolic, intended for use in the afterlife. In Egyptian belief, the sun god Ra journeyed across the sky by day and through the underworld by night in a sacred boat. The king, in death, was thought to join him on this eternal voyage. The survival of this vessel after more than 4,000 years makes it one of the most extraordinary finds of the Old Kingdom. Not far from the pyramid lay the tomb of Khufu's mother, Queen Hetepheres I. Although her burial chamber had been plundered in antiquity, its modern discovery revealed a wealth of finely crafted furniture, offering rare insight into royal life at the time. Khufu was succeeded by his son, Jedefre, about whom little is known. He completed his father's burial complex and became the first king to adopt the title Son of Ra, a designation used by all subsequent kings. Jedefre began construction of his own tomb at Abu Rawash, a site approximately 8 kilometers north of Giza, but due to his short reign, the pyramid was never completed. Jedefre was succeeded by his younger brother, Khafre, who reigned for around 25 years. Khafre oversaw extensive trade, particularly for cedar wood from the Levant, used both for pyramid construction and for boats on the Nile. He maintained and expanded the economic and administrative networks established by his father, ensuring the continued prosperity of Egypt. Expeditions to the Sinai and Nubia are also attested during his reign. Turning back to Giza after his brother's attempt at Abu Rawash, Khafre began construction of his own pyramid. His pyramid was slightly shorter than his father's at 136 meters, though its position in higher ground gives the impression of greater height. Remnants of the original smooth limestone casing survive at its summit, which is a rare feature among the pyramids. It too was likely adorned with a capstone. Inside, a central burial chamber was carved from the bedrock at ground level, its roof spanned by gabled limestone beams. At the west end rests a red granite sarcophagus, which was looted shortly after the pyramid's completion. Khafre's mortuary temple adjoining the pyramid included an entrance hall, a columned court, storage chambers, and an inner sanctuary for offerings. A magnificent diorite statue of the king, known as the seated Khafre, was discovered here, depicting the king enthroned with a falcon representing Horus embracing the back of his head, symbolizing the union of king and god. A causeway led to the Valley Temple, which survives in substantial part. Constructed with local limestone and red granite from Aswan, the temple featured massive pillars and an alabaster floor. The famous Great Sphinx of Giza is also part of Khafre's pyramid complex. It is a colossal sculpture carved from the plateau's bedrock. It has the body of a lion and the head of a man, which in Egyptian framework symbolize the power of the beast and the intelligence of humans. Its precise identity and dating remain uncertain. It may represent Khafre himself or possibly his father, Khufu. Nonetheless, it is considered the largest portrait of a king in the world. The Sphinx was originally painted in vivid yellow, red and blue and once bore a ceremonial false beard, a traditional symbol of Egyptian kingship. Khafre was succeeded by his son, Menkaure, who ruled for an uncertain period, possibly between 18 and 28 years. Menkaure is best remembered for commissioning the last of the Great Pyramids at Giza, though it was his son and successor, Shepseskaf, who ultimately completed the monument. The pyramid reached a height of 65 meters. Despite its smaller size, Menkaure's pyramid was constructed with particularly luxurious materials. The lower courses of the outer casing were made from red granite from Aswan, while the upper courses were finished in fine white Tura limestone, giving the pyramid a distinctive appearance, half red at the base and half white at the top. Inside the burial chamber was a lidless basalt sarcophagus, intended to be transported by boat from Egypt to Britain, but it was lost in a shipwreck along the way. A wooden coffin, added much later during the 7th or 6th centuries BC, was also found within the chamber. The northern side of the pyramid shows visible damage from an attempted demolition by Cairo's Ayyubid rulers in the 12th century AD. South of Menkaure's pyramid stood 3 smaller satellite pyramids, each with its own substructures and associated temples. The mortuary temple was built from massive limestone and pink granite blocks supplemented with mud brick, while the valley temple housed finely crafted grey wax statues, including depictions of the king alongside local deities. Each of Egypt's regions had its own tutelary deity, while gods such as Horus, Ra, Set and Neith were central to the king and state religion. The unification of Egypt was symbolically reinforced by recognizing these regional deities within the royal cult. Seeing the immense scale and meticulous craftsmanship of the pyramids, one cannot help but wonder how were such structures built, and why were they never replicated elsewhere in quite the same way? The answer is multifaceted. During the Third and Fourth Dynasties, Egypt enjoyed exceptional prosperity. Secure borders and effective control over neighboring regions allowed the state to direct its resources toward monumental construction. The fertile Nile Valley ensured abundant agricultural production, and the annual inundation temporarily halted farming, freeing large numbers of workers for state projects without endangering food supplies. Equally important was Egypt's highly organized administrative system. The centralized bureaucracy was capable of mobilizing and managing vast numbers of workers. Written records reveal careful planning and detailed accounting of materials, manpower, and provisions. Local authorities coordinated labor crews, artisans, and scribes. Architectural expertise also played a decisive role. Egypt was the only civilization to fully develop the smooth-sided pyramid with its precise pointed apex. The abundance of stone in the region, combined with the ambition of kings to surpass their predecessors, encouraged large-scale experimentation. Architects were given the freedom to test new ideas, and through this process they achieved remarkable results. For modern observers, it can be difficult to grasp the purely religious purpose of the pyramids. Their immense scale make it seem as though they must have served some practical function. In ancient Egypt, however, the pyramids were purely sacred monuments, tombs for the king, who was regarded as a semi-divine mediator between humans and the gods. His role in life ensured the fertility of the land and protection from enemies. In death, the continued well-being of his soul was believed to guarantee the prosperity of the living, as well as the maintenance of cosmic order. The pyramids also stood at the center of royal funerary cults. Surrounding temples and chapels provided spaces for offerings of food, drink, and goods, which were believed to sustain the king's spirit. These offerings were then redistributed to priests, craftsmen, and local communities, creating a system of economic and religious interdependence. The king's funerary cult extended far beyond the pyramid complex, sometimes including regional cults or satellite structures, ensuring that his spiritual authority endured throughout Egypt. The workforce responsible for building the pyramids was highly organized. Architects designed the pyramids and oversaw construction, coordinating logistics and ensuring that precise standards were met. Skilled craftsmen such as stone cutters, carpenters, metalworkers, and other artisans produced tools, statues, reliefs, and a wide range of architectural and decorative elements. Conscripted peasants formed the bulk of the labor force, performing seasonal corvée work, particularly in transporting and placing blocks of stone. Slaves, the majority of whom were foreign captives, often performed the most arduous or dangerous tasks, such as quarrying and hauling the heaviest stones. To support this workforce, largely temporary settlements, known today as pyramid towns, were established near construction sites. These included housing, bakeries, breweries, and administrative buildings. Workers were provided with grain, meat, and beer. Skilled workers often enjoyed better living conditions, while the majority of laborers received more basic rations. After the reign of Menkaure, his son Shepseskaf, the last ruler of the Fourth Dynasty, ascended the throne. His reign lasted only about 4 years. During this time, the cult of Ra and its priests began to gain influence, the first notable rise of priestly power in Egypt. Unlike his predecessors, Shepseskaf chose not to build his tomb at Giza. Instead, he returned to Saqqara, where he constructed a mastaba of limestone and mud brick. The Fifth Dynasty was established by a man known as Userkaf. The origins of Userkaf are uncertain. He may have belonged to a minor branch of the Fourth Dynasty, or he could have been a high official who married a royal princess, becoming king due to the lack of male heirs. Userkaf reigned for approximately 7 years, though very little is known about his rule. The rulers of the Fifth Dynasty are often called the Sun Kings because of their reverence for the sun god Ra, who is also known as Re. To honor their deity, at least 6 sun temples were constructed during the dynasty, beginning with Userkaf, who built his temple at the site of Abu Sir. For his tomb, Userkaf built a pyramid at Saqqara, accompanied by a mortuary complex and a pyramid for his queen. Most of the stones from the site have been looted, leaving only few remains visible today. Userkaf was succeeded by his son, Sahure, who reigned for 23 years. Sahure led punitive expeditions against Libyan chieftains to the west and nomadic groups to the east, while maintaining extensive trade with the Levant, particularly to import cedar wood for the construction of ships. He also organized an expedition to the faraway land of Punt, acquiring exotic goods such as myrrh and malachite. For his tomb, Sahure chose to build at Abu Sir, probably influenced by the location of his father's sun temple. His pyramid was small and poorly built, but his mortuary temple was the most sophisticated yet, setting a layout that would be followed until the end of the Old Kingdom. The temple's corridors were adorned with numerous intricate reliefs. Its architects also introduced palmiform columns with capitals shaped like palm leaves, which would become a hallmark of Egyptian architecture. Sahure was succeeded by his son, Neferirkare Kakai, who ruled for approximately a decade. Several elaborate mastabas of officials dated to his reign contain inscriptions in hieroglyphs detailing their biographies. For his tomb, Neferirkare also built a pyramid, which was to be the tallest in the Abu Sir necropolis. Almost nothing is known about Neferirkare's immediate successors, Neferefre and Shepseskare, who probably ruled for only 2 years each. Only Shepseskare's pyramid and mortuary temple have been identified, completed by his successor due to his short reign. After Shepseskare, the third son of Neferirkare, Nusere Ini, ascended the throne and ruled for over 3 decades. Nusere oversaw some decentralization reforms, which, in order to discuss properly, we should first outline the state of administration during the Old Kingdom. At the top stood the king, who controlled the collection and redistribution of resources. Beneath him were three classes: the nobles, the officials, and the priests. These were not strictly separate, as an individual could hold multiple roles. The nobles were members of the royal family, while the officials included both nobles and commoners who had risen through the ranks based on talent. The priests sometimes wielded significant power, though this varied depending on the cult. Officials held positions related to managing the economy, agriculture, and labor. The highest ranking official was the king's second-in-command, now called the vizier, though at times there could be two viziers serving at once. Egypt was divided into at least 40 districts called nomes, from the Greek nomos. Each nome was overseen by a nomarch. Previously, nomarchs lived alongside the king in Memphis, but under Nusere's reforms, they were sent to live in their own nomes, which was an important step toward decentralization with long-term consequences. Beneath the officials were the soldiers, about whom little is known during the Old Kingdom. Below them were the scribes, who required an elite upbringing to learn hieroglyphs and join the palace administration. Next were the merchants, who travelled along the Nile or accompanied royal trading expeditions. The craftsmen produced items ranging from weapons to jewelry. Following them were the farmers, who comprised the vast majority of Egypt's population. At the bottom of the hierarchy were slaves, mostly foreigners captured in raids, particularly Libyans and Nubians, and more rarely Sinaites and Canaanites. Nusere was the Fifth Dynasty's most active builder, likely due to his long reign. His Sun Temple, built at Abu Ghorab, just 1 kilometer north of Abu Sir, was known as Shesepibre, Joy of the Heart of Ra. The temple featured a sun altar in front of a pyramidal structure resembling an obelisk, which would inspire the later development of true obelisks. In the Abu Sir necropolis, he built 6 pyramids for himself, his father, his mother, his brother, and his 2 wives. Not much is known about Nusere's successor, Menkaure, including his familiar relationship to Nusere. He ruled for roughly 8 or 9 years and was the last king of the dynasty to construct a sun temple. His pyramid at Saqqara, known as the Headless Pyramid, is largely destroyed today. Menkaure was succeeded by Djedkare Isesi, who ruled for over 4 decades. He led expeditions to the Sinai and Punt while maintaining trade with the city of Byblos in the Levant. During his reign, the influence of the sun cult and its priests began to wane, but it is important to note that Ra would always remain one of the most important gods in the Egyptian pantheon. At the same time, we witnessed the rise of another major deity, Osiris, god of agriculture and the underworld. Initially venerated largely by the common people, Osiris's cult gained increasing importance among the king and upper classes as well. Djedkare implemented significant administrative reforms, decentralizing government, creating new official titles, and gradually transferring offices once held by the royal family to provincial elites. Many positions, including viziers and nomarchs, became hereditary, which created small dynasties of officials. The elaborate mastabas of these elites demonstrate their rising power and wealth. Djedkare was succeeded by Unas, the last ruler of the Fifth Dynasty, who reigned for 30 years. He led trade expeditions and military incursions to various regions, but little else is known about his reign. Unas built his pyramid at Saqqara near Djoser's complex. Though smaller than earlier monuments, it introduced one of the most important innovations in Egyptian religious history, the pyramid texts. Carved on the walls and passages, these spells were intended to ensure the king's safe passage to the afterlife. In some sections, the deceased king is identified with Osiris, in others he ascends to the heavens to join the sun god Ra. The king's association with Osiris and the afterlife laid the foundation for the later belief that ordinary Egyptians could also attain eternal life through the god. Unas left no heir, and his death was followed by a brief period of political instability before the rise of the next dynasty. The founder of the sixth and final dynasty of the Old Kingdom was Teti, also known as Sekhoteptawi, who ruled for approximately 10 years. His exact relationship to the previous dynasty is unclear, though his wife, Iput, was likely the daughter of the preceding king. During his rule, the tombs of government officials reached new heights of grandeur. The most remarkable of these is the mastaba of Mereruka, Teti's second-in-command and son-in-law, which is adorned with intricate reliefs. According to the much later historian Manetho, Teti was assassinated by his bodyguard, a claim that, if true, would represent the earliest recorded instance of royal assassination in Egypt. However, there is no archaeological evidence to confirm this. Teti built his pyramid at Saqqara. Although largely ruined today, the burial chamber was discovered relatively intact, featuring a basalt sarcophagus, a ceiling decorated with white stars on a black background, and pyramid texts covering the walls. Teti was succeeded by Userkare, a shadowy figure about whom almost nothing is known. His relationship to Teti is uncertain. He may have been a usurper or maybe a regent. Userkare ruled for only a few years and left no known tomb. He was succeeded by Teti's son, Pepi I, also known as Meritawi. Pepi ruled for 35 to 40 years, one of the longest reigns of the Old Kingdom. He maintained trade relations with foreign lands and led military expeditions further into Nubia to establish Egyptian influence and gain access to Nubian gold. An inscription in the tomb of the court official Weni recounts that Pepi narrowly escaped assassination as part of a conspiracy involving one of his wives. Pepi built a pyramid at Saqqara, although little of it survives today. He was succeeded by his son Merenre Nemtiemsaf I, who ruled for roughly 5 years. Like his father, he led expeditions into Nubia and constructed a pyramid at Saqqara. The throne passed to his son, Pepi II Neferkare, who was still a child during that time. Pepi II may have ruled for around 65 years, although some later sources suggest an extraordinary 94-year reign. During his rule, Egyptian expeditions into Asia and long-distance trade gradually declined, as did control over the Sinai Peninsula. At the same time, though, authority over the Libyan desert and Nubia expanded. Toward the end of his reign, royal power, which was already weakened by the growing influence of nomarchs and local magnates, diminished further. A prolonged drought exacerbated the crisis, as Pepi II proved unable to manage it, allowing the nomarchs to take matters into their own hands and assert greater independence. Pepi II built a pyramid complex at Saqqara. He was succeeded by his son Merenre Nemtiemsaf II, who was already elderly due to his father's long reign, and thus ruled only a few years. After him, a king named Necherkare Sipta ruled briefly. Almost nothing is known about him, aside from the fact that his reign marked the final collapse of central authority. With his death, the long line of powerful Memphite kings came to an end. The Old Kingdom collapsed and the first intermediate period began. As the power of the king diminished, the nomarchs began forming local armies and managing civil administration. They recruited well-trained local forces, but also employed mercenaries, especially Nubians, who would later become a key component of Egyptian armies. Political power now depended not only on status, but on action, skill, and the ability to maintain loyalty and social order within a specific region. Temples and provincial cults were central to the system, as the nomarchs increasingly associated the legitimacy with local gods. In the northern Nile Valley, the collapse of central power gave rise to Herakleopolis as a center of authority. Herakleopolis is the Greek name for the city of Khenennesut. The rulers of this city, commonly referred to as the 9th and 10th dynasties, claimed continuity with the Old Kingdom. Beginning with a king named Heti, the Heracleopolitan monarchs governed the Memphite and Fayum regions, relying heavily on provincial aristocrats to administer their nomes. Although Heracleopolis maintained the central trappings of kingship, there is little evidence that its rulers could project consistent military or administrative power across the region. Their monuments were modest compared to those of earlier dynasties. Additionally, the Nile Delta was likely subject to incursions by peoples from Asia during this period. In the south, the city of Thebes, or Waset, gradually emerged as a rival power. Intef I, a nomarch and overseer of priests, established a new dynasty and began consolidating control over neighboring nomes. His successor, Wanak Intef II, expanded Theban influence through military campaigns northward, capturing Abydos and securing a firm power base. Theban authority was characterized by disciplined local loyal troops and the integration of temples and provincial cults into the political system. Soldiers, administrators, and scribes were directly accountable to the king, creating a tightly controlled governance structure. Northern and southern Egypt engaged in intermittent warfare throughout this period. Tomb inscriptions from Theban officials describe campaigns against Heracleopolitan territories, while northern sources describe attempts to resist Theban advances. Despite that, for most people, daily life continued largely uninterrupted. Provincial rulers maintained local administration, temples, and irrigation networks, which shows that social order persisted even amid political fragmentation.